Hello and welcome back. Got another blended Scotch whisky review today. This is one that I've always had a fairly positive opinion on, and I think that quite rightly so, a lot of people do. This is Chivas Regal 12-year-old. I do think that for any of us it's important to try some of these standard bottles at least occasionally, because I think that when you go back to something like this, which is cheap, economically produced, it's not going to blow you away, but it's a decent standard whiskey. It really gives you a sense of perspective, it keeps you grounded, and it helps you to have something to compare your other whiskies to. Also has to be said that this stuff is very fairly priced. Here in the UK you often see this on really good discounts, so it saves you quite a bit of money, and that's more important than a lot of people will let on. If you are a regular whiskey drinker, obviously I hope that you're all drinking in moderation, but whiskey can get really expensive, especially when you're chasing the good stuff. A lot of people who review whiskey, they'll put probably what I think is a little bit too much emphasis on the whiskies at the top end. But that's not what it's all about, and you don't have to pay that incredibly high price of admission to enjoy whiskey. You can get yourself a bottle of this stuff for well under £30, probably even under £30 if it's on full price, and have an enjoyable experience. Especially as I often do, if you're going out for a walk somewhere, just have a little bit of this before you go out, or get yourself a hip flask. This is a very economical way to enjoy that whiskey experience in an outdoor setting. But I do think that there's a lot to be said for the value of these economically produced, decent standard blends. So details for this Chivas Regal 12-year-old blend. There's going to be no surprises here. It's 40%. It's almost certainly coloured. What do you guys think? Is it chill filtered? I could probably put that in front of my camera and do a little bit of distortion correction for the bending of light going through that curved glass, and colour correct, and you would not notice because you can see straight through that. Unbelievably clear. So is it chill filtered? Yeah, it is. Chivas Regal is famously owned by Pernod Ricard. It's one of the best-selling blended Scotch whiskies in the world. We're talking about tens of millions of bottles of this stuff going out globally every year. So a staggering amount of Scotch whisky. Chivas Regal is said to be made with Strathisla single malt as a base. That's rumoured to be the primary component in the blend, but also probably containing Longmorn and Glenlivet, all of which are owned by Pernod Ricard. Something else that we always talk about on any whiskey really is the enclosure on the top. As you would expect for such a cheap blend, it's not a cork, it is a screw top. But it's worth mentioning, I think that this is one of the better screw tops that you can get. It's a really nice little screw top, it's got a really nice feel, nice coarse thread. It's hard to get it jammed on there and get it to cross thread. But what is really nice about this is it's got that little plastic white compression seal in there, so a slightly compliant little moulded plastic part. And I think that provides a really nice seal on that little flat edge on the top of the glass. And more importantly, because the shape of that is kind of like a wave shape, it means that as you tighten that down, it provides that little bit of compression, which not only means that you're getting the best seal possible, but it means that you need a reasonable amount of force to back that off. So the fact that this is all plastic and compliant means that you're much less likely to have problems with a screw cap like this backing off and exposing your whiskey to oxidation than you are with the traditional cheap sort of pressed sheet metal screw tops. Is something like this made out of plastic polymers going to be stable long term? Probably, but really who knows, because we haven't been using things like this for too long. But I really think that we need to be looking at a better form of closure for whiskey bottles. So anyway, Chivas Regal 12-year-old. Let's get some of the glass, see if it's any good. See if we get our money's worth for £20 sterling. That's actually what I paid for this one. And as I was saying earlier, I bought this one as a hip flask whiskey, something cheap and cheerful but still decent to take out in a hip flask. So perhaps to be consumed in an environment where you're not tasting and analysing the whiskey critically, but you still want something decent and enjoyable. So yeah, £20. Cheap and cheerful. Chivas Regal 12-year-old on the nose. Something that surprises me about this whiskey, this blended Scotch, is that there's a decent amount of good quality sherry on the nose. It's not overly dry, it's also not overly sweet, a very middle of the road, kind of Oloroso style quality sherry. And that's being backed up with some really good quality sweet maltiness, lots of oranginess on the nose, a little bit of soapiness. I think that this whiskey is not one-dimensional and dumbed down, it's got character. There is also, regrettably, a little bit of a cardboardy youth on the nose of this, and that's possibly coming through from some of that grain, but you have to bear in mind that everything going into the bottle on this one's at least 12 years old, so that kind of gives you an idea of a guarantee of the minimum level of quality that you can expect from this. And I personally do think that everything that goes into this basic Chivas Regal 12, the malt and the grain components, it's all a reasonable level of quality. Let's see how it tastes. It really is astoundingly, almost comically clear. You could read through that. So, obviously you expect blended whiskey, because it's got that grain component which is more refined, to be quite clear, but it does look like it's been quite heavily chill filtered. But in something like this, that's not the end of the world. As for the palate, some more sweet orangey sherry, some more really nice maltiness. I'd say that the body and the palate of this whiskey is reasonably light, but at least it's not rough, it's not immature. It's clearly not an old whiskey, you're not looking at extremely old malt notes in this, but it's mature enough. Going to have one more sip and look at the finish. So as for the finish, actually medium length, which is really quite an accomplishment when you're looking at something so cheap that's bottled at 40%. The fact that it's medium length is really good. Getting some more sweet orangey sherry notes, a little bit of spice on the late palate and finish, but a really, really enjoyable, recommended budget Scotch offering. As for a grade, I'm going to give this a C. I think that if you're looking for something cheap and affordable, cheap and cheerful, then you can do much, much worse for value for money than the Chivas Regal 12. If you're looking for something to go into a hip flask or something to drink casually and not really think about it, then I think this is an outstanding option. Can you taste the malt components in this? I think with the Strathisla, Strathisla is a reasonably distinctive single malt, and I think yes, you probably can taste that. Longmorn, possibly. Glenlivet, probably not. But I think that what you can taste is that it seems to me like there's a reasonably high malt content gone into this whiskey. And I think that all of that malt that's gone in is at least reasonably good quality. I think that this is a much better blended Scotch than things like Famous Grouse. I think that it's slightly better than the standard No Age Statement Bells. And I think that this has an obviously and noticeably higher malt content than the Bell's standard blend. I think that this is a much better blended Scotch option than things like Johnnie Walker Black Label. Johnnie Walker Black Label it's another 12-year-old age statement. It's a blended Scotch, the same as this. You have got a very, very small amount of peat in the Johnnie Walker Black, but for how light and subtle that peat is in the Johnnie Walker Black, and for how rough Johnnie Walker Black is, I'd say that this Chivas is probably preferable. In my opinion, I think that this Chivas Regal 12-year-old is kind of done what Johnnie Walker tries to do but kind of fails at, and that's premiumise a value for money Scotch whisky. I think that with this Chivas you're getting something which is a a step up in quality without increasing the price too much. I also think, and this is something that I like just from personal preference, that the nice, rounded, reasonably sweet sherry and malt notes that you get, especially on the nose of this one, are for me very nostalgic. Whenever I try this whiskey, it really takes me back to perhaps how good blended Scotch was about 20 years ago. There's just something about this whiskey that to me screams kind of recent old-fashionedness. But all in all, for a grade, give it a solid C, bang in the middle of what I would call good. And in terms of value for money, 10 out of 10. And importantly, as I said before, things like this are really important for keeping your sense of perspective and your tasting notes that little bit grounded. Let me know what you think of Chivas and what your best value Scotch whisky for your hip flasks or anything like that is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.